Well, before I get started, I just would like to welcome you all to the Jerusalem Fund, the Gallery Al-Quds at the Jerusalem Fund. I'm Dagmar Painter. For those of you who haven't seen me before, I'm the curator of the art gallery. And I think it's wonderful that you've all managed to come out here tonight. We're going to try to get you out before the weather changes. Especially our generous speaker who has come to us all the way from Baltimore, which is, as you know, quite a difficult trip to make these days. So we're very grateful for his coming. Before I start introducing our speaker, I want to mention a couple of things. We are recording this for our website so that other people who aren't able to come and hear the talk will be able to hear it, and that should be up on our website probably sometime at the end of the week or the beginning of the following week, because there's some holidays coming up. I wanted to just mention a few words about the generous donation, the generous legacy that we received in these 16 prints, 14 of which are by David Roberts. There was a professor emeritus at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh whose name was Brian Peter Johnston. I didn't know him, he didn't know us, yet he left us these really, really special David Roberts prints as part of his will. We're not sure exactly how he knew about us. He's never been down to the Jerusalem Fund. But he probably have heard about us because he became very interested in Palestine. In the 80s, he was actually a professor, one of the foremost experts in the plays of Henrik Ibsen, so nothing to do with Palestine. But he taught in Beirut at the American University in Beirut and became very interested in the region and did travel in Palestine. He actually became very passionate about the culture, politics, and particularly the plight of Palestine. He co-founded the Palestinian Solidarity Committee in Pittsburgh. He brought in speakers to Carnegie Mellon and the University of Pittsburgh. He organized workshops, teach-ins, returned to the region several times on human rights observerships, wrote numerous articles on life in the occupied territories. And we even have an article which we're going to publish on our website of something he wrote in 2007, shortly after a trip to Palestine. So we are very, very honored that he thought of us and left this collection to us. I want to quickly say a couple of words about the physical nature of the collection. Some of you might be collectors, and those of you who are probably noticed that the pieces that we have on the wall are not in the best condition. A lot of them suffer from something called foxing, which is iron and ferrous oxide that gets attracted to certain types of paper. Often the paper itself is very fragile, and all of these pieces were framed in Beirut. They did not have conservatory materials. They didn't have acid-free mats, things like that. They used glues that were not stable. Foxing is very difficult to remove. It's possible to remove some of it if you use a paper conservator who really knows what he or she is doing, and I do have a couple that I can recommend. At some point, our board of directors, of which we have a representative, Mr. George Hishmet, here tonight, will hopefully give us a grant so that we can literally have all of these reframed and properly conserved to try to at least retard any further deterioration. But this is the way that they were hung when the professor had them, and I thought it was important for people to just see that. The humidity levels were not controlled, which is part of the reason that there's a little bit of buckling. These are all things that if you do have a collection, you need to take into account. And if anyone has any questions about things like that, please, come and see me or send me an email, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with people who could help you in this regard. Because it's wonderful to have these things, and we want to make sure that they're preserved for future generations. That said, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. George Lintzeris got a BA in Ancient Studies at the University of Maryland, an MLA in the History of Ideas in the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Johns Hopkins, and his company that he sole representative of, Petra Fine Art, is considered the preeminent David Roberts. He's the preeminent David Roberts specialist in North America with regard to selection, professionalism, and knowledge. National Geographic Society specials on Egypt in 2000 included images from Petra Fine Art's collection of Roberts' visuals of Egypt and Nubia. Also, images from his collection have illustrated the acclaimed work by Professor Eric Klein of George Washington University entitled Jerusalem Besieged, a book that I'm sure some of you have already read. But the coolest part, in my opinion, was that several visuals from the collection were also used as background dioramas for the software game Pharaoh. How cool is that? Aside from all of that, George, and in his capacity with Petra Fine Art, has numerously, generously exhibited and contributed to things at the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC Annual Conference, at the Jerusalem Fund, and other organizations that work for peace and justice in Palestine. So without further ado, and with great thanks, I'd like to introduce George Lintzeris.
It's nice to see so many good friends and friendly faces around here. Initially, I'd like to thank good evening. Is that better? Okay. I would like to thank the Board of Trustees here and the Board of Directors at the Jerusalem Fund, along with Ms. Dagmar Painter, for allowing me to share some thoughts on David Roberts this evening on this special occasion, which acknowledges the behest of these fine lithographs for the Jerusalem Fund. We're going to try something a little bit different tonight. I've decided to delineate my brief talk into three segments. Namely, the first part will be a very cursory biography on the early life of David Roberts. If anyone is interested in something more detailed, I would recommend that they find a copy of The Life of David Roberts by his good friend James Ballantyne, published in 1866. There's another wonderful work called The Biography of David Roberts, R.A. by Catherine Sim, which was done in 1984. The second segment will be we'll talk about the relevance of these David Roberts lithographs and the artist himself. And for the third part of the segment, I thought a question and answer session would be in order. I would ask those in attendance to pose any questions regarding the different editions of these lithographs' collectability or their valuation. Also, in viewing the collection afterwards, the exhibition afterwards, I will do my best to answer any questions that you might have. If you need to contact me post-lecture, I have brought along some business cards that you can find on the front desk. So let us begin here. In 1796, David Roberts was born in Stockbridge, Scotland, a small village on the outskirts of Edinburgh, to an itinerant cobbler and his wife. At an early age, his natural artistic ability became apparent when he would sketch on the kitchen whitewashed walls processions of animals and figurines in charcoal and red chalk. Since the economic circumstances of the family did not allow the young David to get a proper education, he was apprenticed at the age of 10 to a house painter named Gavin Boygo for 7 years. Boygo taught his young apprentice the rudiments of design, as well as creating the illusion of trompe l'oeil and marbleizing on walls and niches. Young Roberts left the firm in 1815 and became a decorator. The following year, he returned to Edinburgh and became a scene painter in his second-rate touring theater company. By 1819, he procured a position as official scene painter at the Royal Theatre in Glasgow. As his reputation grew, Roberts was engaged by the Drury Theatre Company in London, and in 1822, along with fellow painter and friend Clarkson Stanfield, exhibited his first painting of Dryburgh Abbey at the Society of British Artists. In 1826, he graduated to the more prestigious Covent Garden Theatre, where the 15 scenes he produced for the performance of Mozart's Abduction from the Seraglio was met with resounding success. In 1830, he left the theater and became a studio painter. He traveled extensively in Britain and France and found success in selling many of his oils. He also submitted drawings and proposals for monuments and other architectural structures, both in Edinburgh and in London. Further, he provided illustrations for numerous travel books, both at home and abroad. He was elected as an associate member of the Royal Academy in 1838 and a full member upon completion of the Holy Land volumes in 1844. In 1832, heeding the advice of good friend and fellow artist David Wilkie, Roberts's travels took him to France and to the Low Countries, and eventually on to Spain, Cordoba, Grenada, Gibraltar, and Morocco. He returned to Seville, where he spent 5 months, but fled the continent before an outbreak of cholera. This journey served as a proving ground for his later and more important Eastern expedition. Apart from experiencing hardships, he learned how to manage the best use of his travels. Of the nearly 150 drawings of the Spanish Peninsula, 37 were selected and published in the lithographic tome, Selected Picturesque Sketches of Spain in 1837. The success of this work greatly surprised the artist himself, with 1,200 sets being sold in the space of only 2 months. In turn, he spent over 7 months on their production, as he was not satisfied with the way the drawings had been copied onto the lithographic stones by the other artists. As a child, David Roberts dreamed of visiting the Holy Land and the countries which had been the scene of the events of the Bible. With the sale of these recently published set of Spanish lithographs, Roberts had the means to afford such a journey. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt with 35,000 troops and 16,000 sailors, accompanied by 150 savants, among which were artists, surveyors, doctors, botanists, and engineers. The savants, who survived and made it back to France, produced an exhaustive encyclopedia of Egypt, 23 elephant folio volumes entitled The Description de l'Egypte. The expedition itself was a political and military fiasco, and it changed the face of the earth by revealing the splendor of a mysterious and forgotten civilization. It gave birth to Egyptology. Napoleon Bonaparte's military conquest of Egypt was short-lived, but the French incursion into that closed and medieval country and the British measures to dislodge them brought Egypt directly to the attention of the outside world. The beginning of the 19th century, after the defeat of the Napoleonic forces at Acre, left the British clearly in a position of unassailable cultural and military influence in the Middle East, and at the dawn of a new age of exploration and survey that, for the Americans and the British, would center mostly on the Holy Land and its place in the romantic imagination of an overwhelming Christian public. Muhammad Ali, the Viceroy of Egypt and the country's new ruler, was intent on modernizing his nation and actively supported contact with Western professionals and travelers. Roberts capitalized on the swelling fascination with Egypt's ancient, exotic, and diverse appeal. For his pending trip, Roberts read the available literature and relied on letters of introduction to various local British officials and residents. These contacts helped him to make the necessary arrangements for his travels. We must remember that David Roberts was the first Western artist of significance to travel to the Middle East, whose intention was to create an extensive visual record of the major sites of the Holy Land in Egypt. In late September 1838, he arrived in Alexandria, trekked southeasterly to Cairo, hired a servant, chartered a dhow and a crew. During the first part of his trip, Roberts sailed up the Nile and then resketched all the major sites on the return journey. He spent the remainder of his time drawing the Islamic sites around Cairo, as well as the pyramids and Sphinx at Giza. The second leg of his eastern journeys was by camel overland through Sinai, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. His panoramas of religious sites of Jerusalem, majestic ruins at Baalbek, the recently rediscovered lost city of Petra, the holy mountain of Sinai, and the convent of St. Catherine's are among the most coveted and recognizable scenes from his portfolio. Enduring the rigors of land and climate, Roberts donned Arab garb so as to not attract attention, recorded every important historical site along his route, producing hundreds of drawings with notes on light, color, local customs, and dress. His portfolio is considered by his peers as one of the richest that ever left the East. These sketches were the basis for the brilliant lithographs created when he returned to London and were published between 1842 and 1849, with an enormous appeal for a Victorian public eager for vicarious travel to remote areas and new vistas. The work of David Roberts is of obvious artistic value, in direct contrast with those images executed in the Description de l'Egypte, which are often characterized as stylistically rigid. Viewers will be struck immediately by these fine hand-finished lithographs in color. Choice of subject, precision of vision, and attention to detail make the places come alive in a way that demonstrates Roberts' own passion for the land. The work is historically interesting because it showcases a new awareness of the Middle East by the West. But this work is also important because its appearance was part of a complex of factors that brought forth significant scientific methods of interpretation for biblical literature. In a time before photography, David Roberts' prints offered immediate images that shaped popular perceptions and in turn influenced other artists who prepared drawings and paintings for religious literature and teaching purposes. These lithographs are critical in that they mark a turning point in Western understanding of the Holy Land and its sacred sites. In conclusion, David Roberts' view of Egypt's pharaonic antiquities and scenes of Islamic Cairo, as well as the biblical sites and landscapes of the Holy Land, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon, place him in the middle of the Oriental experience. He is one of the pre-photographic, topographical descriptive artists, yet in endowing his scenes with ambiance and life, he anticipated the subsequent Orientalists who gave their images interpretive value and narrative meaning. These scenes still stand as records of a distant and exciting discovery of Europe's early encounter with Egypt and the Kingdom of Heaven. Thank you very much.